Welcome to another episode of the Business Exchange, How Business Works, brought to you by the American Business Council, the voice of American businesses in Nigeria, and the affiliate of the U.S. Chamber here in DC. Well, I already let the cat out of the bag because for the first time, we're hosting this podcast outside of Nigeria and here in Washington, D.C., in a very unusual place as well, the headquarters of the Center for International Private Enterprise. And this is deliberate because, beyond being partners with CIPE, we're going to be having something that will be happening very soon, and which is the launching of the Africa Hub for the first time, obviously, in the continent and in Nigeria. For those who don't know who's or what CIPE is and what CIPE represents, CIPE is a 40-year-old organization largely funded by the U.S. Congress, but operates in about 130 countries, 23 of those countries in Africa, and doing great work in the area of governance, strengthening democracies across these countries, and also really doing quite a lot in ramping up economic resilience in these countries as well. At this point, I would like to introduce my guest for this vodcast. My guest today is Becky Johnson. Now, Becky is the Chief of Staff, and she's also the Head of External Affairs, External Relations, Innovation, and Strategic Engagement. Becky, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Before we move on, I would like for you to maybe just share one or two thoughts about, because I know before we started, you said you had done like 2.5 years at CIPE here. Mm-hmm. Maybe just give us maybe there's something else I missed out about what CIPE does before we go right into the meat of the conversation.
No, I think that was a wonderfully expansive introduction of our work. CIPE, as you mentioned, has been around for over 40 years. We are an affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and are part of the National Endowment for Democracy. And we're really founded around engaging the private sector to bring about democratic reforms and market access around the world. And so in those 130 countries that you mentioned, many of which are in Africa, that's where our work has been focused. And so we have really tried to get business a seat at the table to bring about reforms that make competition more fair and the operating environment fairer as well.
That's really good to know. And just thinking about it and the whole idea about setting up the African Hub, mm-hmm. Why is this the right time? Why? I mean, I have like three barreled kind of questions around this.
Sure.
How does this fit into the global strategy for CIPE, mm-hmm. and why Nigeria?
Right. Well, we have such wonderful partnerships in Nigeria, like the one that we have with ABC. But CIPE's team in Africa and its partners have really been operating in collaboration across borders for a very long time. Okay. But the model, the sort of organizational model, hasn't mirrored that operation. And so this is really marrying how they're already doing work with how we're going to structure. And so we thought it was important to do this because we've found that often that cross-border collaboration can drive greater impact. And you can also better leverage lessons learned at the local level in one country to drive impact in another. And so having an organizational strategic approach that's regionally focused helps you leverage that expertise that you have on the ground. But we always want to engage with local partners for local solutions. That's really important to us. We don't do this alone. We wouldn't want to do this alone.
Absolutely.
And so we want to hear from our local experts and our partners and the people who really know what's going on the ground to not only understand the challenges they're facing, but also understand the solutions that we can help support. And so putting a regional hub office enables us to be more responsive to those partners, but also listen to them more and be more directly engaged with them. And I think about issues that are facing the continent at large that, are challenges facing a lot of people around the world. And one example is, China's investments across Africa. I mean, you have in 2023, China had a record $282 billion in African trade, which much we find tends to be corrosive and really just self-serving investment for the Chinese government, while the U.S. only had about $7.4 billion. And as the U.S. shifts from being an assistance-based model to a more commerce-driven approach, really understanding what's going on locally on the ground and how solutions can be found is going to be even more important. And it's giving business an even more outsized opportunity to influence policymaking, but also bring about the democratic reforms that CIPE really tries to champion. And so I think that this hub model gives CIPE the opportunity to leverage our private sector engagement for greater investments and growth, but also the creation of values-driven supply chains that are so important for the broader economy.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Becky. I mean, one of the things you talked about, I mean, that resonates with me, considering that, the American Business Council has close to 101 U.S. companies, and we keep hearing things around governance, and these are critical in terms of even how businesses happen and all that. How do you think that, setting up this the hub in Nigeria, even though it's obviously for the continent, how do you think it would help strengthen democratic governance in the continent?
Yeah, businesses need democracy and democracy needs business. And so CIPE has been driving impact across Africa for decades by supporting things like trade, digital transformation, entrepreneurship, and good governance. These efforts are creating fairer markets. They're creating stronger institutions and growth that benefits both Africa and global markets through more expanded trade, investment, and democratic partnerships. And what we've found, not just in Africa, but around the world, is that in democratic settings, policymaking is more predictable, corruption is less entrenched, and the rule of law supports really open competition. But this stability is really the foundation on which long-term investment decisions are made. Companies need stability. Business needs that predictability in order to operate. And democratic values and structures help bring that predictability and stability to markets. So we're looking at doing more of that. Again, this will all happen in partnership with the local experts that we have on the ground, because you guys know better than us what to do. And we would never want to impose any sort of idea of what should happen. But it really needs to be something that strengthening democratic governance is owned locally, and we're just there to support it.
Yeah, talking about business stability, I know that you do a lot of work, with local partners and private sector. So, because I know when you talk about local partners, you're thinking even the civil society groups, the academia, but also private sector. So, how do you think that private sector can work with? I mean, it's almost like I'm saying the obvious coming from where I sit, but perhaps it may be helpful to hear that from you. How do you think private sector can contribute to the work of CIPE, to kind of strengthen democratic governance, build, really add value to the work that perhaps the African Hub can deliver?
Sure. I think solutions can't only come from one place. And often we see where governments try to kind of control a lot of what's going on. But the private sector is the primary group that's creating jobs and is also investments in countries. And so it's so important that they be engaged in reforms and in strengthening institutions, but also shaping the environments in which they're operating. You know, but when we get into some of this at the local level, and it's not limited to Africa, it's all over the world, where you see that democracy around the world has really kind of a mixed trajectory. And some countries are continuing to strengthen their democratic institutions and others are facing decline, but Africa's no different. But then you see bright lights sort of like Ghana and Botswana and other countries that continue to strengthen democratic.
Nigeria.
Yes, and Nigeria, I'll get to Nigeria, continue to strengthen democratic institutions. But even countries with a long history of successive democratic elections like Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, in some cases record weaknesses in protections of freedoms. And in other countries, successive coups have further eroded democratic advances. But for Africa's private sector, the stakes are really high. And there's also great opportunity with those high stakes. And so CIPE's mission in engaging with the private sector is really clear: to work alongside business leaders, civic society, and policymakers to ensure that markets are open and economies are competitive and that democracy remains the bedrock of economic progress.
I mean, you haven't left anything out, quite frankly, because because you know when you think about how private sector needs to engage, for a long time we've been a bit shy of getting involved in what may look like politics. I recall that we have a program obviously with CIPE called the Private Sector Development for Democracy, and initially it was like, how do we even get into talking about democracy without making it look like we're talking or walking into politics?
Right.
But again, really understanding that without a solid democratic environment, then businesses will not thrive.
Right.
Then having the kind of economic resilience that we would need to make things happen would really, really not happen at all. So I know that the hub is going to be driving democratic governance, but how can it also help strengthen? I know you touched it, but maybe I would want us to kind of stretch that a bit. How would the hub help in strengthening or driving economic resilience?
Yeah, that's essential everywhere, because it's not just about job growth and
because
GDP
that's what private
growth.
sector
Right,
needs, right?
Right. It's about also safeguarding protections too. CIPE has worked with hundreds of private sector partners across Africa to really advocate for business enabling environments. This work has included building business leadership skills, improving governance, and encouraging public-private dialogue for inclusive economic growth. That work is all going to continue. We think it's essential that the private sector have a seat at this policymaking table. Otherwise, you're leaving out people who influence people's lives on an everyday basis in a unique way that gets to the fundamentals of how they live and how they provide for their families. And so it's essential that they be a part of that. And the coming years will test the resilience of African economies. But the interplay between global economic shifts and domestic policy reforms, and then also democratic stability, will really determine whether this era is going to be remembered as a period of stalled potential or as kind of the dawn of sustained inclusive growth. And the Africa Hub is really going to afford CIPE the opportunity to continue to engage with those local partners and experts like yourself, while also taking a holistic view across the continent to support stability and growth more broadly. but it's going to leverage the successes and the lessons learned on a local and country by country basis to really inform programming across borders so that it can have a broader impact.
Yeah, and as I think about private sector, I also think about not just the big players.
Right.
I think about the SMEs that account for most part, maybe over 3/4 of the businesses you find in the continent. And so I'm kind of thinking, how would CIPE, or I mean, do we have, of course, looking at how CIPE would work, with this hub.
Right.
How would the hub help in making those SMEs? I mean, we're seeing a lot of changes in the global world. I think the markets are getting more competitive and all that. How can CIPE support these SME organizations or companies to thrive?
Yes, it's so important because often they don't have a seat at the table.
I tell you.
But as Lola, our regional director, has put it, small and medium-sized enterprises are global engines of trade. And with the right policies, the U.S. private sector has an incredible opportunity to scale impact across emerging markets in Nigeria. But small and medium-sized enterprises are often marginal economic actors and in many emerging economies.
Yeah, marginal but critical.
Right, they're so critical because they make up such a significant population. I mean, up to 40 to 50% in the region employ up to 50 to 60% of people. But often, they're less equipped. Even if they do organize around associations, they're not always well represented. And so we really try to work with them to build that capacity, get them trained, and make sure that they're able to engage in their local environment so that they can have an impact. And CIPE has a network of over 500 business associations that we work with across the continent. And what I've found both in Africa, but then also in opportunities that I've had to travel to some of our other programming, and I will soon be in Africa, and visiting Nigeria will be my first time to the continent. But what I've found is that we also have the ability to bring these leaders together, these association leaders. And it's a great opportunity for them to learn from each other and collaborate and really talk about what's working in their geographies that maybe can be replicated in others, and where they've had challenges and how they've faced those challenges. And so I think CIPE's network enables that, both that cross-association collaboration, but also looking at it from a hub perspective, you're looking at cross-border collaboration, and I think that's going to be really impactful.
Yes, and I also think that CIPE is currently working on a project on building excellence in associations and chambers, local chambers. I really think that's a great project because then you're able to get even the smaller organizations and associations that are SMEs that come together to really improve and get strengthened, right? And the whole conversation about what we're talking about in terms of economic resilience becomes not just saying it for the sake, but also really putting that into practice by building capabilities and competencies. So I think it's quite a lot of work, that CIPE is putting out there. So I would say, again, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but but what do you think the first year of the African Hub would be like?
Right. Well, we're going to be really focused on getting this set up in the right way.
Okay.
We've had country offices, and we want to make sure that transition from country offices to a regional hub goes really smoothly. And then also positioning more the functional, kind of the back office support teams within that hub, that goes smoothly. But most importantly, we want to engage with our local partners. We want to do a lot of listening a lot has happened in the past year that has shifted how companies are operating, how economies are operating. And we want to make sure that any solutions we are supporting are locally driven. And that's going to take a lot of listening, and it's going to take a lot of work at the regional hub level to make sure that we're not only looking at this from a regional perspective, but that we're bringing solutions and supporting solutions that are driven by our local partners that can really have a measurable impact.
Okay, talking about measurable impact. I think I'll take a cue from that. How would you measure your success?
You know, we're figuring that out because for a long time, this has really been about the individual impact. You know, the entrepreneur who now has shifted from the informal sector to the formal sector, and now has a lot more structure and support broadly and greater access to markets. Or we've talked a lot about, you know, legislative and regulatory change. Some of the things that we're looking at is how do you measure impact, job creation, local economies being shifted. We're trying to figure out some of those metrics, but we're really coming around 3 thematic issue areas of advancing economic freedoms, expanding opportunity, and then strengthening economic resilience and democracies. And we're going to focus our efforts there, but again, our partner's success is our success. That's really our return on investment. So the greatest impact we can measure is whether the engagements that we've done with our local partners have made a positive impact in the operating environment for the private sector, and if the private sector has been able to bring about reforms that really drive the democratic values that adhere to our mission.
Yeah, okay, so let's go back to your partners, because you said our partner's success is our success. So how do you intentionally want to deepen this relationship between the local stakeholders, partners that you currently have, and ensure that, you know, while you're doing this, we're still really having African voices, you know, at the center of everything that you're doing?
We want to have listening sessions. We want to meet with the partners. We want to talk to the partners. We want to make sure that their voices are being heard by the regional hub, that the regional hub is fostering these conversations and the dialogues with them. It's intentional.
Yeah, talking about intentional. So now I'm thinking that's time to curve. Can you please tell us some of the success stories?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, I know some of them, but I really would like our listening and viewing audience to hear from, I wouldn't want to say horse's mouth, but from you, you know, obviously being the strategic role that you're playing here at CIPE.
Yes, of course. Well, you know, we talked a little bit about the small and medium-sized enterprises and the huge impact that they make. You know, when you're talking about 50 to 60% of a workforce, that's enormous. And one of the things that we identified, that our partners really identified, was that many of these small and medium-sized enterprises are women-owned. And they weren't well represented. And so we worked together and established the Association for Women in Business Network 11 years ago in Nigeria. And this association now represents over 70 primary associations and over 4 million entrepreneurs. And these individuals lead advocacy at the national level, and they now have a seat at the table. And it's making a significant impact on their businesses and their communities, where before they didn't have a voice, and now collectively you're talking about 4 million entrepreneurs having a voice. In Kenya, the business community wanted to create a more level playing field for fairer competition, and CIPE worked with the private sector to lead the private sector leaders in Kenya to establish the first annual conference around business integrity. And now this annual conference is really setting the tone for fighting corruption and creating fair market competition across Kenya. You know, I will get to our relationship with you guys, but before I do that, I want to talk about this special case in Malawi with our trade team, where our partners identified a challenge in cross-border trade in Malawi. So CIPE went in, and because of our interventions in training customs officials, we had revenue surged and document errors dropped by 50%, which just creates a more predictable operating environment for the importers and the exporters. But last but not least, an excellent example is our work with the American Business Council. And CIPE, in collaboration with you and your organization in Nigeria, we worked on the Private Sector Development for Democracy Forum, which you will certainly know more about than me. But it is enabling us to convene key stakeholders from the private sector to academia, civil society, media, and think tanks to really chart a course for advancing democratic resilience in Nigeria. And together, you know, we're pushing for a lot of regulatory reforms that will improve the ease of doing business. And I think that's really meaningful. And it's going to be interesting to see sort of the lasting impact that that brings.
Yeah, I also think that because sometimes when we talk about democratic governance, or when we talk about corrosive capital, or when we, you know, we tend to look at, or sometimes people think it's all about the government, right? But sometimes it's even, for instance, the PSDF project, when we think about corruption, we're looking at also what is the role of private sector, how is private sector playing in that space, and how do we want them not to play in that space?
Right.
And so, you know, the whole idea about just the ethics first project you have, I kind of feel that it's very important to call this out, because I think it's really critical, because it helps governments, and it also helps, actually helps private sector more, because that way, if, for instance, I'm a U.S. company and I need to, you know of certain organizations I need to work with, you know, by this project, I'm able to say, okay, yeah, these are the folks that make sense, that we kind of speak the same language, and it's important for us to work. So I think it's one project that has a very strategic positioning in terms of value as well, and I'm hoping that a lot more of that would happen, you know, with this Africa hub.
I agree. You know, the Ethics First program is a wonderful example, and I'm glad you brought it up. You know, that grew to now having over 750 companies involved and operating across 13 countries, which again is creating more predictable partners and customers and consumers and supply chain organizations for companies to work with that they can trust. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, so it looks like, I mean, we could go on and on, but it's like someone is already rolling eyes at me and making sure we kind of close shop on this. But one last thing I would like to ask is, what message would you like to, you know, put out there to African leaders?
Sure.
Regarding, you know, the whole notion about this project and the value that this would bring to the table. Can we just, you know, what's the message I would take out there?
CIPE is really thrilled to be strengthening our presence in Africa. That has not been the case for a lot of democracy supporting organizations in this current environment, and we're thrilled to be able to continue this work. You know, it represents our unwavering commitment and really provides an exciting platform for us to share decades of lessons learned through new programming that's driving positive market changes and supporting democratic reforms. But what I really want people to know is that we can't do this alone, and we wouldn't want to. And so we look forward to continuing to foster really strong partnerships with business leaders and associations, they know what reforms and support is needed to make really impactful changes on advancing economic freedoms, expanding opportunity, and strengthening economic resilience and democracies, both locally and across the region. And we're just really honored to be able to work with such wonderful business leaders and associations and really continue this mission.
Great, great. Are you going to be at the lunch?
I will be.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, that would be great.
I know, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I probably would advise you on some, somebody else may do that, but I could just share some notes on good places to visit, food, where to eat.
Please do.
Restaurants.
Yes.
And I mean, Lagos is a very exciting place to be. On this note, I would like to say thank you to our audience at home there, watching us. And I would say follow us on all the social media platforms to listen in on what we do at the Business Exchange, how business works. And so this is Margaret Olele, your host again, signing off. Thank you.